Valves and risers, next step. Down the line. We want to put valves and risers on. Obviously the first thing is they have to be the right height to stick out the proper height above ground. So we have to have the right riser, we have to have the right depth of ditch, and then we have to have the right valve tops to put on them. If it's steel, lots of times we just weld them right on the pipe, right down the row. If it's plastic, we saw the poly risers and the threaded valves that we thread on. And when we do thread those materials together, we want to use a lubricant sealant that will allow you to tighten them down, because whenever you have plastic to plastic or plastic to anything, you need to have some kind of a lubricant to tighten them up. Otherwise the plastic will tend to gall up. It will start to peel itself off of the threads. The threads deteriorate or destroy themselves as you tighten the fitting down without some kind of a lubricant on it. And the lubricant of choice, generally something like Permatex. A real sticky, gooey material that has really good lubrication qualities and also will seal up, and yet it doesn't ever get totally hard. It always stays semi-flexible, similar to silicone, the way silicone will react. It never gets totally hardened. It always has a little flex to it. Well, Permatex is kind of the same way. Then whenever you break a riser, because it's inevitable somebody's going to run over one of those eventually, you can simply dig up the old riser that's been broken off, unthread it. Because you have lubrication on the threads, it'll unthread now. Kind of like a bolt, you know, if you put some kind of like an easy off on it, it's pretty easy to undo them the next time you want to undo them. But if you let them rust up, then they become real hard to take off. Well, the same thing's going to happen with the riser in the pipe. And again, straight is right. You know, if we're going to be running a line out through the field, we want to make that thing straight as a string. So make sure that those risers get put in straight. Now we have a little problem with this pipe of wanting those pipes that are simply gasketed and pushed together. When we put water to them, they're going to want to pull apart. And so we have to put thrust blocks in to keep that from happening. Now thrust blocks usually means pouring concrete standards in the line. Wherever we have a T, we would pour a concrete thrust block on the back side of the T. If we have a T like this, we want to pour a thrust block on the back side of that made out of concrete. Because we know concrete is not going to rot. Now the poor man's way of doing a thrust block is putting like a railroad tie behind it. But over time that railroad tie is eventually going to rot. And that's not such a neat deal. Now sometimes you can get away if you dig the edge of the ditch and are able to push the pipe right against the edge of the ditch. Where you have undisturbed soil, it has a lot of structure and a lot of strength. But you don't really want to try to get away with that. You're way better off to put in a thrust block.
What, like a cinder block?
Is anything like a cinder block?
Well, now, what's going to happen with the cinder block?
Pretty weak.
Well, we have the problem of, do we have it right against a solid wall on the backside?
Yeah.
You know, if we had a real solid wall that it was pushing against undisturbed soil, then a cinder block might work, or any kind of masonry block. But if it's sitting loose in the ditch too, it'll just push the cinder block and the T sideways.
You just have to pour those if you're using like a coupler and a gasket?
Yes. If this were glued, then maybe it's not necessary. In most cases it would not be necessary. Till you get into big flows. You know, if it's a 2-inch pipe, you wouldn't be excited about it. If this were a 12-inch pipe, yeah, I'd put a thrust block in no matter what it was. Because I got a lot of side force pushing. You know, all the force to turn that water down there has an equal and opposite force pushing it back, that T back that way.
You're not, I guess I don't understand. You're not just pouring concrete around this pipe, are you?
On the back side of it, that's it. You can oftentimes, now, you got to be a little careful.
It won't
Sure it will. It'll hold nice and firm.
Like putting a foundation.
What you want to be careful of is if you got gaskets in here, concrete will destroy the gaskets. So you can't let the concrete pour over a gasketed fitting. That's a big no-no. But yeah, you can literally let the soil be the form for pouring your cement thrust block. But make sure it's undisturbed soil on the back side. So you're looking right down on top of the ditch here. This has to be an undisturbed cut of the, you know, coming down here is your edge of the ditch. So you have to let the back side, the edge of the ditch, be your form for the back side of it. And then you want to put some kind of forms on either side of there. You form it up with wood or whatever.
You do the same thing with corners too?
Elbows, you do the same thing with. Even more of a problem with elbows. And sometimes at the end of the line. If it's a gasketed line, at the very end of the line where you cap it off, then you're going to have to put one there too. Yeah. So turns and ends going to have thrust blocks. And there are specifications for, depending on the size of pipe, how much material has to be applied so that you have enough strength for the given size of pipe. We know what the limitations of flow are, so we know what the limiting forces are going to be within the piping system, and then the thrust blocks are sized accordingly.
Where's that information found?
When you work with PVC, all the PVC manufacturers will give you that information, and all the fittings manufacturers have that information available. So whatever company you're working for are going to have the tech support information for you. And it's an ASTM standard. You can even look it up in the Federal Register to find that out too. So it's published everywhere. And there's lots of how-to books on putting in PVC pipe. And when we get into the troubleshooting classes later on down the line, the irrigation students will be getting that information. So you'll become pros at putting in PVC before you're done here.